She was just a maid in his mansion, invisible, overlooked, and one mistake away from being replaced. But when Billionaire CEO Dorian Caldwell offered her a ring, it wasn't out of love, it was a contract. The trap. One she didn't see coming until it was too late. And now, standing in a silk wedding gown at a ceremony she never dreamed of, Imani realizes she's not a bride. She's a pawn. But what she doesn't know is, beneath Dorian's cold silence is a secret. A truth so buried, it could either destroy her or set her free. Because the man who tricked her into marriage may have been the one man who could never walk away from her. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. But she was not the bride she thought she would be. The air was thick with white roses and old money. Violinists played something elegant and sad. Guests sipped champagne beneath crystal chandeliers in a private estate on the cliffs of Amalfi. Everyone smiled. Except her. Imani stood still in the courtyard, watching her reflection blur in the fountain's water. A fitted wedding gown wrapped her curves. Her skin glowed against the silk. Her hair was swept into a regal updo, not one she chose. The diamond ring on her left hand sparkled like a lie. A ring from a man who hadn't kissed her since the ceremony. The man who tricked her into marrying him. 12 hours earlier, she was a maid. Folding his sheets. Pouring his coffee. Invisible, quiet, replaceable. And now? She was Mrs. Dorian Caldwell. Wife to a billionaire. His wife, on paper. A wife by contract. Not by love. He hadn't touched her all night. Not even after the photos. Not even after the fake kiss in front of the guests. Not even now, when they were alone again in the villa's master bedroom. She stared at the cold, untouched bed as he entered behind her. His voice was low. Controlled. The press is outside. Smile when we leave tomorrow. She turned slowly. That's all this is to you, huh? He didn't flinch. You signed the contract. And you signed my life away. Dorian stepped closer. His suit was still perfect. His face unreadable. You agreed, Imani. I agreed to help you, she said, voice trembling. I didn't agree to disappear. Silence. And then she asked the question that had haunted her since he first slid that marriage license across the marble kitchen counter. Why me, Dorian? Out of every woman in your world, why trick me? He looked at her for the first time with something softer, guilt? Regret? But whatever it was, he swallowed it. And turned away. Imani stood there alone, in a dress that wasn't hers, with a name that wasn't hers, in a marriage that wasn't real. Or so she thought. But what she didn't know yet, what Dorian had never told her, was that none of this was for the press. Not the ring. Not the marriage. Not even the lie. Because somewhere between the coffee she poured and the floors she scrubbed, Dorian Caldwell, billionaire, CEO, and master manipulator, had fallen in love with the one woman he thought he could control. And now? He was about to lose her. If someone you trusted tricked you into marriage, even with promises of wealth or protection, would you stay and fight for the truth? Or walk away forever? Speech balloon, drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you would do. Imani had never dreamed of marrying a billionaire. She didn't dream of penthouses in the sky or pearls draped over her shoulders. She didn't imagine extravagant dinner parties or private jets to tropical islands. No, Imani's dreams had always been smaller, quieter. She wanted a life she could own, a life where she wasn't invisible, where her skin didn't dictate her worth, and where she could stand on her own. She wanted a life where her education mattered, where her ambitions weren't boxed in by her humble origins. But those dreams felt like luxuries she couldn't afford. It was 7 a.m. when Imani stepped into the luxurious Caldwell estate for the first time. She had just turned 24. Her job interview was for a housekeeper position, though she suspected the job description was far more expansive than that. As she walked through the front gates, the vast estate before her felt like something out of a movie. A grand white marble mansion surrounded by beautifully manicured gardens. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and expensive perfume, something she'd never been surrounded by before. But Imani had grown used to being on the outside, looking in. Raised in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were limited and the weight of expectation was heavy, she had learned early on to do whatever it took to survive. Her mother had always said, "Don't look for the world to give you things. Go take them. Go find the path that nobody else sees and create your own place in it." That mantra kept Imani grounded, kept her pushing even when life seemed impossible. So, she did what she had to do. She worked as a maid, a waitress, a cleaner, whatever paid the bills. But it wasn't enough. And then came the ad for the job at Caldwell Enterprises, a prestigious position in one of the most elite families in the country. It was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. The first time she met Dorian Caldwell, she was in his kitchen, scrubbing the floors after a late-night gala. He stood in the doorway, towering and immaculate in his sharp black suit, eyes hidden behind his signature sunglasses. "I told you the floors weren't that bad," Imani had said, wiping a tear from her cheek. It was late. She had been cleaning all day, and she hadn't even had time for a proper meal. Dorian had leaned against the doorway, watching her in silence for a moment. When she finally glanced up, his lips quirked into a half-smile. It wasn't charming. It wasn't welcoming. It was calculating. He didn't ask her name, didn't thank her for the hard work. Instead, he said, "You're cleaning my house, but you don't understand how things work here. It's not just about cleanliness, it's about control. People like us, we own everything. And that means we decide what stays spotless and what gets overlooked." At the time, Imani thought he was just some arrogant rich man with an ego the size of his estate. But she never expected how soon she would be caught in his web. It didn't take long for Imani to realize that Dorian Caldwell was more than just a businessman. He was an empire builder. But his empire was built on secrets and control. And, of course, his charm. As the days passed, Imani became more than just a housekeeper. She was asked to stay later, to work more, to be discreet. And despite the demanding hours, she had a strange sense of fulfillment. She wasn't just doing mindless tasks, she was building something. Her quiet ambition and desire to make her mark felt like it had found a place in Dorian's world. But something kept gnawing at her. Imani noticed the way Dorian would always test her boundaries, not just with his words, but with his actions. He would hand her a drink, his fingers brushing hers just a little too long. Or the way he would always find reasons to ask for help when she was alone. The cold, calculated businessman turned into someone who seemed to understand her struggles, her desire to do more than simply clean his house. She couldn't deny it. She had started to look at him differently, not as a boss or an employer, but as someone who saw her. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But it was never that simple. Dorian's attention was never truly her own. He was never really interested in the woman behind the maid's uniform. He was interested in what she could offer him. Her energy, her loyalty, her compliance. As the days turned into months, Imani began to see the cracks in the facade. He was just as lonely as she was, just as trapped in his own world of isolation, power, and privilege. But the truth was, he didn't want to be free. Dorian liked control. And in some twisted way, she could feel it. He had already started to control her heart. Then, one evening, a simple conversation changed everything. Imani had been sitting in the kitchen again, fixing herself a quick dinner before heading home. Dorian entered, as usual, his steps heavy with purpose. "I need to discuss something important," he said, sliding a contract across the table. "You've been invaluable to me. And I'm offering you something no one else in this position would ever get, a place in my life beyond the household." She looked at the contract. Marriage. For a moment, she was sure she misread it. "You want me to marry you?" she asked, incredulous. Dorian's response was as cold as it was calm. "You can say no, of course. But I'm offering you security, protection, a future where you can have everything you ever wanted." Imani felt the pressure in her chest. The way he spoke, so matter-of-fact, as if she had no choice. But what he didn't know was that Imani had already been falling for him. She hadn't wanted to. She hadn't planned to. But the more time she spent with him, the more she learned about the man behind the billionaire CEO mask. the harder it became to see him as just a ruthless businessman. Imani's dream was to be more than invisible. But would you ever marry someone who tricked you, even if it meant a chance to change your life? Could you live with the truth of being used? Speech balloon, tell us in the comments. We want to know if you'd make the same choice. Imani never expected that the contract marriage she signed under pressure would lead her down a path where she would truly question everything about Dorian Caldwell, and everything about herself. It started innocently enough. The press photos. The public appearances. The whispers of the perfect couple. Dorian had kept his distance, maintaining the cold, calculated demeanor he'd always carried with him. But Imani knew, deep down, that something was changing. Something about the way he looked at her, how he began to touch her more often, how he started to care about the little details of her day-to-day life. But it wasn't until she walked into his office one afternoon and overheard a conversation on the phone that she realized the truth was slipping through her fingers. It was a Thursday, a sunny afternoon in late spring, and the office was quieter than usual. Imani had just finished her usual tasks for the day when she decided to check in with Dorian. His office was on the top floor, hidden behind thick glass windows that overlooked the entire city, a symbol of his power. She knocked once, then opened the door. Inside, Dorian was on the phone, his voice low and commanding. "Yes, the deal is set. She'll be out of the picture by next week." Imani froze, her heart pounding. She'd been cleaning the hallway when she'd heard his voice. At first, she thought it was just a business call. But when she heard her name, something inside her shifted. Her hand gripped the doorframe as she strained to listen. Imani's role is just a formality now. Once the papers are signed, the company will be ours. The words echoed in her head. The papers. The company. She was the pawn in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. The truth hit her like a ton of bricks. Dorian had been using her, all along, for his own power play. She stumbled back, barely able to catch her breath. Her body trembled, not from fear but from rage. The one thing she had thought was real between them was nothing but a contract. Dorian's words had been a facade. Everything from the moments of tenderness to the nights they'd spent talking had been manipulated for his own gain. And worse, he had never seen her as an equal. She felt the weight of it, the weight of every betrayal, every unspoken expectation. And she realized in that instant that she had to make a choice. When Dorian hung up the phone, he turned to see her standing there, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides. "I didn't know you were here," he said, stepping toward her. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, the kind he used when he was hiding something. Imani didn't speak at first. She just stared at him, her emotions rising, swirling. "Imani, what's wrong?" "What's wrong?" she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "You lied to me, Dorian. You used me." His face hardened, but Imani wasn't done. "You said you loved me. You said that this was about us. But all along, you were using me for business." Dorian's eyes flickered. He stepped closer, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." His voice was softer now, almost pleading. "Imani, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "Tell me, Dorian, what was it all for?" His silence filled the room, and Imani felt the truth settle like a cold stone in her stomach. Dorian stood still, his eyes fixed on her. There was no more charm in his expression. No more veiled affection. Just a coldness that Imani hadn't seen before. The man she had married wasn't the man she thought he was. He was just a businessman. A man who used people to get what he wanted. "I'm sorry, Imani," he said, his voice low. "But you have to understand. I never wanted this to go like this. You were always a means to an end. I needed your name on the paperwork. I needed you to be my wife." For the first time, Imani felt the full weight of her own self-worth collapse. She had given him everything: trust, affection, loyalty. And what had she gotten in return? Nothing. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. He didn't love her. He never had. A surge of anger washed over her, and for a moment, she was ready to walk away. To leave it all behind. The mansion, the wealth, the facade of a life she'd been pretending to live. But then, something shifted. The truth wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of everything she stood for. Her worth was never tied to a contract. And the life she was about to leave behind wasn't just about money and power, it was about her own future. Imani took a deep breath. You don't get to decide that anymore. I do. She turned to leave the office, but Dorian's voice stopped her. Imani, wait. His tone was desperate now. Please. You don't know what you're saying. She glanced back, meeting his eyes one last time. You made your choice, Dorian. Now, I'm making mine. The door closed behind her with a finality that felt like the beginning of something new, something that didn't involve him. If you found out the person you trusted most had been using you all along, how would you respond? Would you fight back, or walk away and rebuild your life? Speech balloon, tell us in the comments. What's your move when betrayal hits close to home? The next few days were a blur. Imani barely slept, barely ate. She spent hours pacing her small apartment, thinking about everything, the contract, the lies, and the man who had promised her security but instead had shackled her to a game she never wanted to play. Every moment she had shared with Dorian now felt like a carefully choreographed performance, one where she was the unwitting lead, dancing to his tune. And now that she had discovered the truth, the real question was, why hadn't she seen it sooner? She had allowed herself to fall for the charm, the gifts, the small moments of tenderness that Dorian had offered, only to realize they were all part of his manipulation. And still, there was a nagging part of her, one she couldn't shake, that felt torn. She wanted to walk away, to never look back. But somehow she couldn't. Dorian was dangerous. But he was also deeply complicated, and as much as she hated to admit it, there was something inside her that still wanted to understand him. To know how far this manipulation went. And why. It wasn't until a late-night visit to Dorian's office, her curiosity driving her like a compulsion, that Imani found the first real clue. She had been avoiding him, refusing his calls, but when she received an email from his assistant with a schedule that included a meeting for the next morning, Imani knew she had no choice but to show up. The meeting, however, wasn't what she expected. As she entered Dorian's office, she was confronted with the familiar, cold silence that had been growing between them. But this time, something was different. His face was harder, his expression closed off. He was pacing by the window, his back to her, as though lost in thought. I thought you wanted to talk, Imani said, her voice sharper than she intended. Dorian turned, his usual composure slipping just slightly. I don't want to argue, Imani. I don't want to argue either. I just want answers, she said, stepping closer to him. What else are you hiding from me? Who else are you lying to? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. I didn't want this to be the way it was, Imani, he began, his voice strained. I wanted to give you a life you deserved, but I did it the wrong way. Imani crossed her arms, not backing down. What do you mean? Dorian hesitated, clearly wrestling with himself. Then, with a sharp breath, he spoke. I never intended for you to find out like this. But the truth is, he paused, there's more to the deal than just the company. There's a dangerous man involved, and you're in the middle of it now. The words hung in the air like a bomb about to detonate. Imani stared at him, processing his confession. A dangerous man? Her mind raced to try to piece the puzzle together. What are you talking about, Dorian? She asked, her voice low, trying to steady her breathing. There's someone behind the scenes who helped me orchestrate everything, Dorian continued. Someone who wanted control of the company. Someone who won't stop until he gets it, and he's already made threats to both you and me. Imani's stomach turned. Who is it? Dorian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a folder, thick with paperwork, and handed it to her. This is what I've been hiding. This is the truth about what you're involved in. If we don't handle this carefully, it's going to destroy us both. Imani took the folder from him, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened it carefully, scanning through the pages. But the names and figures meant nothing to her until she came across one line that stopped her cold. Dorian Caldwell is the primary beneficiary in the death of Charles Montgomery. The words echoed in her mind. She looked up, confusion clouding her thoughts. What does this mean, Dorian? He turned, his face pale. Montgomery was my father's business partner. He died under mysterious circumstances years ago, and now the people who are pulling the strings are threatening to expose everything. And they won't stop until they have control. Imani's mind raced, and her chest tightened with fear. What was Dorian involved in? And why was she suddenly at the center of it all? Imani slammed the folder shut, trying to make sense of everything. You've been lying to me the entire time, Dorian. You used me, manipulated me, and now, you want me to be part of this game you've created. I never wanted you to be a pawn in my game, Dorian said, his voice raw. But now that you know, there's no going back. This man, he's dangerous, and I need you to help me take him down. Imani shook her head. You never asked me if I wanted to be involved. You made this decision for me. I never meant for you to get hurt, he said, his voice quiet. But now that you're in this, I can't let you go. Imani's emotions were torn in 1,000 directions. Hurt, confusion, anger, betrayal. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of something else, the smallest hope that, somehow, she could find a way to make things right. If you discovered that your life had been manipulated by someone you trusted, would you stand by them to fight for the truth, or walk away, no matter the cost? Speech balloon, drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in Imani's position? The days following Dorian's confession were a blur of confusion and distrust. Imani couldn't sleep. She couldn't think. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the name on the papers, Charles Montgomery, her mind replaying the sentence Dorian had said. He died under mysterious circumstances. The words echoed in her head as she walked through the empty halls of the mansion, her footsteps silent on the marble floors. Everything felt hollow. Even the grand estate, which had once felt like a dream come true, now felt like a cage. She had been trapped in it from the start, and now, knowing the truth, she couldn't escape fast enough. Imani barely registered the passing days, her mind clouded with questions. Why would Dorian involve her in such a mess? What did he think she could do? She was just a maid. But no, she was no longer just that. She was Mrs. Dorian Caldwell, but only on paper. She wasn't part of his world. She was just a tool to him, something to help him achieve his goals. But something had changed between them, something deeper than just a business arrangement. He had come to need her, and that was the one thing Imani couldn't understand. She had always been the one to do the sacrificing. Was it even possible for him to love her now? It wasn't until Imani walked into Dorian's office that everything came crashing down. The door was slightly ajar. She hesitated, wondering if she should just leave. She had told herself that after their last conversation, she was done with him, done with all of this. She wasn't his pawn. But curiosity pulled her inside. She pushed open the door and froze. There he was, sitting at his desk, holding a photograph. A photograph of Imani, the one taken just a few months ago at their wedding. But in his hand he was holding a second photo, a much older one, of a young woman. Imani's heart skipped a beat. The woman in the photo was not her. She stared at it for a long moment before Dorian looked up, his eyes flashing with something she couldn't quite place. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dorian's face hardened, his gaze shifting to the photo in his hand. "I didn't want you to find out this way." Imani walked closer, her legs like lead. "Who is she?" Dorian didn't answer immediately. He set the photo down on his desk, his hand lingering on it for a second longer than necessary. "That's her," he said quietly, a hint of remorse in his tone. "The woman I was supposed to marry." Imani felt the blood drain from her face. His first fiancée. The woman who had probably been a part of Dorian's life long before her. The woman he really wanted. Her name was Cassandra Montgomery, Dorian continued, his voice strained. She was my father's business partner's daughter. I was supposed to marry her. The plan was always for us to merge the businesses, control everything together. Imani felt the words hit her like a slap in the face. "But you didn't," she said softly, her throat tight. "You didn't marry her. You married me." Dorian looked up at her, his eyes dark. "No, I didn't. Because Because she was murdered, Imani. Imani's blood ran cold. She was murdered? Imani repeated, her voice shaking. By who? Dorian's hands clenched. He stared at the desk. The guilt in his eyes was overwhelming. It's complicated. My father, he was involved. And after her death, I had to play the part. I took her place. It's why I had to push you into this marriage, Imani. I had no choice. Imani stepped back. You're telling me that Cassandra was murdered? And that you replaced her? Dorian nodded. Yes. And then you just manipulated me into marriage? Her voice broke, the betrayal finally setting in. That's what this was all about. You didn't care about me. You wanted the company. You wanted the power. I never wanted it to happen this way, Dorian said, standing up. He stepped toward her. Imani, listen. Cassandra was the one I was meant to be with. But after she died, everything changed. I was forced to take on her life, take on her role. You were never meant to be a part of this, but you were the only one who could help me pull it off. Imani felt the tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was done being weak. But you never gave me a choice. You used me from the beginning. I know, Dorian said softly, his voice almost breaking. And I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Imani could feel the weight of the truth settling on her shoulders. She had been used. She had been nothing more than a pawn in Dorian's game. The marriage, the contract, everything. It was never about her. It was always about the empire. But the most painful part of it all? She still loved him. Despite the lies. Despite the manipulation. Despite the betrayal. Imani loved him. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. Dorian stepped forward, his voice desperate. Imani, please. You have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to survive. I was trying to save the company, and you were my only option. Imani shook her head, her emotions a tangled mess. I can't do this anymore, Dorian. I can't live in your lies. She turned away, her heart breaking as she walked toward the door. Dorian didn't try to stop her. He didn't speak. He just watched her go, his face a mask of regret. If you discovered that your partner had been lying to you for months, using you to achieve their goals, could you forgive them? Or would you walk away, no matter how strong your feelings were? Speech Balloon, let us know in the comments. Could you keep loving someone after they've betrayed you like this? The days that followed Dorian's confession felt like a blur. Imani couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. The betrayal was too much, and the hurt too deep. Her world had cracked open in ways she hadn't imagined, and now, it felt like she was drowning in the pieces. She kept replaying his words in her mind. Cassandra was the one I was meant to be with. The betrayal wasn't just about him manipulating her into a marriage, it was about her being a replacement. Not good enough to be loved, but just enough to fill the role of someone else. Imani spent her days wandering the mansion aimlessly, unable to escape the memories. The life she had imagined with Dorian, the hopes, the quiet moments of love, seemed like a sick joke now. She was a fool forever believing that she meant more to him than just a business asset. It was late afternoon when Imani decided she couldn't stay in the mansion any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in. The house, once a symbol of her dream life, now felt like a prison. She needed air. She needed distance. She needed to be far from Dorian, far from the lies, far from everything that had come to define the life she had never chosen. She walked out of the mansion, her heart heavy, her mind a maze of swirling thoughts. Her only desire was escape, but where could she go? The world she had known had been upended, and she felt like she didn't belong anywhere anymore. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Dorian's name flashed on the screen. She ignored it. Every time he called or texted, it only hurt more. She didn't want to hear his voice, didn't want to hear his apologies. She didn't need them anymore. Imani walked for hours, aimlessly, until the sun began to set. The cool night air felt like a balm against the fire burning inside her. But even the fresh air couldn't cleanse her heart. As she sat on a park bench, her thoughts turned back to the one thing that had never changed, her ambition. She had fought for a future, worked so hard for a life that didn't define her by the color of her skin or her role as a maid. She wanted to be someone. She wanted to be respected, loved, truly loved. But now, everything was gone. She had nothing left to fight for, no one to turn to. She felt so utterly alone. Her phone buzzed again. "I know you're hurt," Dorian's voice came through the speaker when she answered. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted you to feel like this." Imani squeezed her eyes shut, the words hitting her like physical blows. "You wanted everything to happen this way, Dorian. You lied. You used me to take over a company. You've manipulated me, made me think you loved me when all you ever wanted was power. I'm nothing to you." "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's not true. I never wanted this to be the way it was. I need you. I need you to understand, I didn't mean to fall for you. You weren't part of the plan, but you became the only thing that mattered." Imani was silent, her hand gripping the phone tightly. "Please, Imani, just come back. We can fix this. We can make it right." She pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to stop the tears from falling. She had trusted him. She had given him everything. And yet, all he could offer was guilt and regret. But it wasn't just the lies. It was the fact that Dorian had never truly seen her. She had been a replacement. She had been the one to fill the gap left by Cassandra. The tears came then, streaming down her face uncontrollably. But what hurt most? It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that in spite of it all, she still loved him. The man who had torn her apart. The man who had lied to her. The man who had used her. Imani stood up abruptly, wiping her tears, taking in deep, shuddering breaths. She had to keep moving. She had to stay strong. There was no going back. She had to reclaim herself. But as she started walking again, she heard a voice behind her. The same familiar voice. "Imani, wait." "Dorian." Her heart skipped a beat. She turned, facing him. There he was, standing there in the dimming light, the man who had been both her salvation and her destruction. He looked at her with those same eyes, eyes that had once been full of affection, now clouded with guilt and sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said. "I am so sorry. But I can't let you go. I don't want to lose you." Imani stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. What did she want? Her mind was a whirl of emotions. The love she still had for him, the anger, the betrayal. But somewhere beneath it all, there was a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be something real between them. If you were in Imani's shoes, having been betrayed and used, yet still carrying feelings for the person who hurt you, could you find the strength to walk away? Or would you try to rebuild what was broken? Speech balloon, tell us in the comments. What would you do if love and betrayal collided? Imani stood there, facing Dorian, the man who had lied to her, used her, and turned her world upside down. His eyes were full of remorse, full of pleading. But what she saw in his eyes didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the voice inside her head, the voice that had been drowned out by fear, hurt, and the need for love. The voice that was now saying, enough. Enough of being used. Enough of letting someone else define her worth. Dorian took a tentative step toward her, his voice soft. "Imani, please, don't walk away from me. Don't walk away from us." Imani looked at him, the man who had everything, yet was still so broken. But that wasn't her problem anymore. She had spent so long living for everyone else, for the man who saw her as an object, for the contract she had signed, for the promise of a future that was never truly hers. But now she was reclaiming the only thing that mattered. Her life. Imani took a deep breath, standing tall. She could feel the weight of the past few days on her shoulders, the pain, the confusion, the heartbreak. But she also felt something lighter now. Stronger. "I can't keep doing this," Imani said, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "I can't keep being a part of your game, Dorian. You've made your choices and now I'm making mine." He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. "No," she shook her head. "I loved you. I truly did. But I can't love someone who only sees me as a tool. A replacement." Dorian's face fell, but Imani wasn't done. "I've spent my whole life trying to make everyone else happy. But I can't live like that anymore. I'm not just a pawn in your game. I am my own person, Dorian." And I'm done letting you control me. Imani took one final look at Dorian, her heart full of pain but also relief. There was nothing left between them. No more lies. No more broken promises. I'm leaving, she said, her voice steady. I'm walking away from all of this. From you. From the contract. From everything you've ever offered me. Dorian stepped back, his face a mixture of anger and sorrow. You can't just walk away from me, Imani. You're my wife. This contract, it means something. Imani shook her head. It means nothing to me anymore. And for the first time, she didn't feel the guilt. She didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. She felt free. Imani walked away from the mansion that night, leaving behind the life she thought she wanted. The life Dorian had promised her. But she knew now that she could create her own future. She didn't need a billionaire CEO. She didn't need a contract. She didn't need to be a part of his world. She was enough on her own. And that was all she needed. For the first time in months, Imani slept soundly. No nightmares. No doubts. Just peace. And as the days passed, she rebuilt herself. She threw herself into her work, using the knowledge she had gained from Dorian's world to carve out a new path for herself. She started her own business, one that focused on helping women like herself, women who had been held back by their circumstances, by the people who saw them as less than. Imani didn't want to be a victim. She wanted to be a champion. Weeks later, she received a call from Dorian. This time, there was no guilt in his voice. There was no manipulation. It was just raw honesty. I never wanted to lose you, Dorian said. I didn't realize how much I loved you until I saw you walk away. I've been thinking about everything. About how I treated you, how I hurt you. Imani stood on the balcony of her new apartment, watching the city below. It was hers now. She took a deep breath. I'm not the same woman you tricked into marrying you, Dorian. I've learned how to stand on my own. And that's the person I'm going to be from now on. Dorian's voice softened, a rare sincerity in his words. I know. And I'm sorry. I'll always love you, Imani. I don't expect you to come back, but I just wanted you to know. I was wrong. Imani stood tall, her heart no longer weighed down by his words. She had found her own voice, and no apology could take that away. Thank you, Dorian, she said, her tone final. But I have to keep moving forward. Without you. Imani made the hardest choice of all, walking away from the man she loved for the sake of her own freedom. Could you do the same if you found the strength to live for yourself? Speech balloon, share your thoughts in the comments. How would you reclaim your life after betrayal? Imani sat at her desk in her modest office, reviewing the documents for a new project she had launched, a foundation aimed at empowering women who had been exploited by corporate greed and manipulation, much like she had been. Her life, though still a work in progress, had found purpose. Her passion, once buried under the weight of Dorian's world, was now her driving force. The phone on her desk buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number, but she knew exactly who it was before she answered. Imani. Her heart skipped a beat at the sound of his voice. Dorian. She hesitated for a moment before picking up the call. What do you want, Dorian? I know you don't want to see me, he began, his voice strained, but I need you to hear me out. Please. I owe you the truth. Imani leaned back in her chair, her heart heavy but resolute. Truth? After everything? You've given me nothing but lies. What could you possibly say now? There was a long pause on the other end. When Dorian spoke again, his voice was softer, almost broken. Imani, I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not even asking for your understanding. I just need you to know that I've changed. I can't undo the past, but I can tell you the truth about everything. About Cassandra, about the deal, about why I did everything I did. Imani swallowed hard. She had spent months building her own future, putting the past behind her. But part of her, despite everything, still wanted answers. Imani stood up from her desk, walking toward the window of her office. The city below seemed to hum with energy, life, all things she was now a part of. Her life. Her choices. Dorian continued, his voice soft and urgent. I told you that Cassandra was the one I was meant to marry. What I didn't tell you was that I never loved her. It was always business. She was a means to an end. The plan was for her to marry me so we could take control of the company together, but when she died, I lost the only way to secure everything. I was desperate. I thought I could control the situation. I thought you would help me, but I never imagined. Imani closed her eyes, hearing the words she had longed to hear, but they didn't bring peace. They brought rage. You thought you could control me too, she said coldly, her voice steady, despite the fire inside. You thought I was just a pawn. A woman to replace her. A woman to manipulate. Imani, I swear, that's not what it was. I never meant to hurt you. She shook her head, unable to hold back the tears. Then why did you hurt me like this, Dorian? Why didn't you just let me go when I asked? Why did you keep me in your world, in your lies? There was silence on the other end. But she wasn't finished. She needed to say this, for herself, for everything she had lost. I am not your savior. You used me, Dorian, and I let you. You tricked me and I thought you loved me. But love doesn't feel like this. Love doesn't destroy you. Imani's words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The truth had been laid bare. Dorian had used her, manipulated her, and in doing so, had lost her forever. I never wanted to hurt you, Imani, he whispered, his voice strained. You were never just a tool to me. You became everything I needed. I just couldn't let go of the plan I'd made. Imani took a deep breath. The man she had once loved, the man she had thought would be her future, had become a shadow of what she imagined. She had seen the cracks for so long, but now the entire foundation had crumbled. It's over, Dorian. Her voice was firm. You need to let me go. Let me go and finally live the life you've built without me. There was another long pause. Then, Dorian's voice broke through the silence, quieter than before. I will, Imani. I'll let you go. But just know, I will always love you. Imani's chest tightened, but she stood tall. I'll always remember the good parts of us, Dorian. But I can't live in your shadow anymore. She paused, her voice shaking just slightly. I'm free now. And so are you. There was no more pleading. No more desperation in Dorian's voice. He had lost her. And for the first time in this entire chaotic relationship, he realized he had no control over her anymore. Goodbye, Imani, he said softly, his words heavy with finality. Goodbye, Dorian, she replied, her voice steady as she ended the call. Imani placed her phone down on the desk, standing still for a long moment. She felt the weight of everything, the heartbreak, the anger, the disappointment, but she also felt something else. She had let him go. She had walked away from the man who had used her, the life that had nearly consumed her, and now she was free. There was no turning back. Imani walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Her future was hers to decide. And this time, it would be built on her own terms. She would no longer be defined by anyone else's choices or expectations. She would no longer live in the shadows. Imani closed her eyes and let the wind blow across her face, feeling more alive than she had in years. The next chapter of her life was just beginning. And this time, she was in control. Imani made the difficult choice to walk away from the love she thought was real. But sometimes, the hardest part of love is knowing when to let go. Could you walk away if it meant reclaiming your own life? Speech Balloon, let us know in the comments. What would you do if you were in Imani's shoes? It had been months since the phone call with Dorian. Months since she had walked away from a life that had tried to break her. Imani's world was no longer defined by his actions or her past mistakes. It was hers. She had started her foundation, the Women's Empowerment Network, aimed at helping women of color build their own businesses, break free from toxic relationships, and reclaim their voices. Every day, she worked with women who were just like her. Women who had been overlooked, underestimated, and manipulated by the world around them. And now, she was the one teaching them to stand up, to take control. Imani smiled as she sat at her desk in the small office she had rented for her foundation. The walls were still bare, but she had a vision, a future, and it was all within her grasp. She had learned so much from the past year, lessons that, at the time, had seemed too painful to bear. But those lessons had shaped her into someone stronger, someone more resilient, Someone who would no longer let anyone define her worth. Imani stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city she had once felt so lost in. It was hers now. The world was vast, filled with endless possibilities. She wasn't stuck anymore. She wasn't trapped. The phone buzzed on her desk, pulling her from her thoughts. She picked it up and saw a message from Jasmine, her closest friend and confidant. "We did it, girl. Your foundation's official. Time to celebrate." Imani grinned. Jasmine had been by her side from the very beginning, helping her plan the launch of the foundation, offering support when she needed it most. Imani texted back quickly. "You bet we did. Let's get that celebration on." As much as Imani had moved on from Dorian, there was still a part of her that had never fully closed the door on him. The love she had for him, the betrayal, the heartache, it all lingered somewhere in the back of her mind, even though she had built a new life. But one morning, a letter arrived at her office. A handwritten letter. Imani felt a pang in her chest as she opened it. The familiar scrawl of Dorian's handwriting filled the page. "I know it's been a long time, and you probably don't want to hear from me. But I owe you more than just an apology. You were never just a contract. You were never just a deal. You were the one person I never should have hurt. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. I've learned more from losing you than I ever did while I had you. I will always love you. Goodbye, Dorian." Imani stared at the letter for a long time. She had expected his apology. But the truth was she no longer needed it. She had already forgiven him, not for his sake, but for hers. She placed the letter in the drawer of her desk. There would be no more dwelling on the past, no more pain. She had forgiven him. She had forgiven herself. The last tie to Dorian had been severed, not by him, but by her own strength. It was a choice she had made. A choice to move forward. And in doing so, she had finally reclaimed herself. Several months later, after the foundation's official launch, Imani found herself in a cozy cafe, sitting across from someone who had been a constant support in her journey, Evan, a fellow entrepreneur and passionate advocate for women's rights. Their connection had grown over the past year. He had been there for her as she rebuilt her life, not asking for anything in return, just offering encouragement and understanding. Evan was kind, grounded, and most importantly, he saw Imani as she was, a force to be reckoned with, not a woman to be controlled. "I'm proud of you, Imani," Evan said softly, his eyes warm with admiration. "You've done what most people would never have the courage to do. You've built a life on your own terms." Imani smiled, feeling something stir in her heart. Something real. "You've been there every step of the way," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." Evan reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but sincere. "I'm glad you found your strength," he said. "And if you'll have me, I'd love to be there for the rest of it." Imani looked at him, her heart finally at peace. This was her future. Imani knew that she still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, she felt ready for whatever life had in store for her. She had learned to trust herself, to fight for what was hers, to walk away from what no longer served her, and to step into a future where she was in control. As she looked out the window of the cafe, the city stretched before her, full of possibilities. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was free. Imani chose to walk away from everything she thought she wanted in order to find her own path. Have you ever had to let go of something to find yourself again? What would you do if you had the power to create your own future, free from the chains of the past? Speech balloon, let us know in the comments. What would your new beginning look like? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.